Okay, looks like we are running. Let us get our light bulb steampunk audio video opening on the road. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the wee hours of the morning on the 18th of August, 2025. And again, don't forget all the tortuganwordpress.com stuff is open access. Everybody can share away to your heart's content, to wanton abandon, etc., etc., so on and so forth. We have a slightly more packed operation today, in addition to our ongoing dissection of Titans. And a little part two where we get to explore the really incompetent spelling errors. Hi, Lisa. The incompetent spelling errors of Jeffrey Tomkins. I also attended a CMI creationist talk here in Spokane today, and I will be reporting on that, which kind of connects up to Titans as well, because it's because of the speaker that was here again um, that Scott Gillis, who is kind of a lower echelon CMI poster that apparently is their front man nowadays for these little relatively short coffee clutches. He was the reason why at his previous talk in Idaho that I got the Sarfati book. So this whole bit that we've been doing for these many, many weeks can be attributed to him. First off, Sarfati and Tay are continuing on the soft tissue thing. They devote a big chunk of this chapter to this. They invoke a 2017 paper from Lee et al., which I'll be putting a link up to, and a 2011 one from Buckley and all on collagen survival material, which relates to collagen. And it's so, Guten Morgen, Hindel. We're nearly at the bottom end of my Deutsch at that phrase. Anyway, that collagen can only last like out to 900,000 years. In reality, the Buckley paper noted that only 1% of collagen should be typically around after about 700,000 years or so under optimal conditions. But 1% is not zero. And if you have millions of peptide fragments around in an organism, less than 1% of those still can yield stuff. And it depends on how detailed your analytical techniques are to be able to extract stuff. And remember, we're really talking about fragments, not big molecules. In fact, the Buckley paper itself indicated that you could even find some 1.5 million years old, which automatically was exceeding the limit that they were going on. Now, of course, the state of the art in 2011 didn't stop. And the lead paper, which was from 2017, was explicitly noting the part iron had to play in preserving the tiny fragments they found. That was the matter we brought up last week regarding Sarfati and Tay's weird lack of citations on Schweitzer, the 2014 paper from them. That kind of swirled around for this new meeting that Scott Gillis gave at a church here in Spokane that I got an alert on because of CMI, and it was open to the public, and I was a public, so I and a friend went there. It was kind of what I expected, but less, shorter, no Q&A. It's a kind of a bigger church that he was attending rather than the one in Idaho. So they had a little more people, but still kind of sparse, maybe 200 in a theater that could certainly seat 500-600 or so. So it was fairly sparse. Various age groups of people, a lot of older ones, but some families and younger people with tattoos and all that. It was basically about the dire pervasiveness of evolution, and that the Christian is not equipped to defend themselves typically because of all the evolutionary propaganda, and they do not realize that the creationists have just as much evidence and are dealing with it. Isn't he a doctor? Scott Gillis isn't. Sarfati, I think, has a doctorate. I'm not sure about Tay. In what, I'm not at all sure, but it certainly doesn't show. Anyway, it was very intriguing because he was doing a bit that I wonder how much of it was in some of the earlier material that I didn't get to see when he was in Idaho, but it was a slideshow approach with some anecdotal tales and the like. And along the way, he was trying to give the impression that they pay attention to the same data as the evolutionists, except, of course, they have their new spin. So he puts out a rhetorical question: do you think we pay attention to the same or different? And almost all of the audience is saying same, and I couldn't resist from the back row going different. And a little guy farther down towards the stage was kind of chuckling at that. And I did it again when he was repeating another bit. I didn't get any nasty pushback, or nobody came over to me. They may have thought I was just being a smartass, but of course, as anyone who knows my work knows, I mean that literally, that no, creationists are not paying attention to the same data. They're paying attention to little teeny slices of the data and missing 90% of it and misrepresenting big chunks of what they're doing. Anyway, so along the way, he had some really interesting little boners. Newsom's going after Trump, as he should. Yes, it's in fact, the more lawsuits and things that pop up in a lot of these areas, it would be kind of one of the bitter ironies of the people who serve in Trump 2.0, that the highly litigious Trump, who lives and dies by court cases, and even better if he can get rid of the court case by becoming president, that the minions farther down the road will be spending the rest of their lives thrashing through court cases in which they are the plaintiffs and about to lose. A lot of them may go the same route as Rudy Giuliani. If they're lawyers, they'll end up disbarred. I mean, it's going to be an interesting circumstance as we start hitting the shit fans later on in the year as our economy starts falling apart. Anyway, Gillis had the claim, quite false, that Mt St Helens ash was being turned into rock really fast. And that was an incredible misnomer. Tuff, yes, which is classified loosely as a rock, but it's not rock like a big block of granite, solid stuff. There is no known example, and I've never seen a creationist contend that any of the pyroclastic flows from Mt St Helens had turned into pickaxe resistant rock, because it didn't. And it was an intriguing indication that Gillis was rather far down on the food chain, that he would be repeating that kind of a trope because it's one of the tropes that's in their apologetics. He also authority quoted Mary Schweitzer, which kicks us back to the soft tissue issue that Sarfati and Tay are still going on, where he's authority quoting her in a little PowerPoint slide. No mention whatsoever about the fact that Schweitzer was particularly peeved at all the creationists doing exactly what Gillis was doing, which was misrepresenting the findings of her work. So it wasn't at all surprising that it was a relatively superficial show. I was surprised there was no Q&A afterwards. Right after it was done, he skedaddled off stage, and the guy playing the piano came out and filled in material. So it was in many respects less interesting. Pretty much the same books, including Sarfati and Tay's Titans, were on sale in the panoply of stuff, spread out a little better. They have more tables than that to play with because it was a bigger church. But the same level, my friend and I, we were flipping through a few of the little books. We were noticing which ones had like references and which ones didn't, and that was marshaling things. And I made a point of having the conversation just loud enough that anybody that, if they felt like overhearing, would make no doubt whatsoever that we were highly critical of this stuff. And yet I didn't get any pushback from anybody. There were no altercations. We didn't have any arguments with anybody. But it would have been intriguing to think whether or not there would have been anybody that would have been trying to defend the work. And they said, well, wait a minute, what are you saying about that? No, we didn't get any of that. So it's very, how many of the gang that watch the show will be slurping up the material at CMI as Gillis would like them to do? Hard to tell. Wouldn't surprise me if a big chunk don't. but that those who do will accept it credulously, and they will have no attempt whatsoever to fact check any of the source material. So that kind of covers that material. So the part 2 on dear old Jeffrey Tomkins. This one, ostensibly the article back in May, June issue of Acts and Facts is following the now party line at ICR that designed adaptation is okay. He's specifically talking about tandem repeats in our genome, but really spectacular for creationism. You can take a look at the content because we'll be putting the post on that up, and I'll be putting the links to the various papers involved, so you can follow up on that as well. But what intrigued me about it was how many of them were misspelled. The names of the people involved, as in most of them. So there was a 2010 paper from Rita Gemael, which ends up as P. Gemael rather than R. There's a Katie Burchard et al. 2023 paper that was turned into K. Nurchard, N instead of B. And then a Ching Lang Wang et al. 2024 paper became Wanth with an F, comma Q. Both of those, the Nurchard, Burchard, and Wanth Wang thing, are most probably, as a clunky old human typist, I'm well aware of this, fingered typos, because B and N and F and G are adjacent on the QWERTY keyboard. So it's clear that old fart Sarfati, or whoever typed up the little thing, was fumble fingering, probably typed the correct letter, but it ended up the wrong letter. And the point is that the print version and the later online version, nobody spotted it, which means maybe nobody typo error corrects. They don't proofread. Does this surprise and shock me? Not particularly, but that's a symptom of the kind of let it slide approach to things that can allow errors to creep in, and those typographical errors can be handy. So who's more scientific, ICR or CMI? That's an interesting bit. I'd say lately, because of Guliuz's obsessions about natural selection being wrong, and because Tim Clary and his little cadre at ICR are also the ones trying to move the flood down into the Cenozoic, they're the most revisionist of the current crowd of young Earth creationists. And so in that respect, there's a bit more data paying attention to in that sense at CMI. But when we're talking about the background ideology, the ability to misrepresent source material, ICR's got Brian Thomas, who is one of the great manipulators on the whole soft tissue issue bit, and we'll be getting oodles of references to him in Rocks 2. To some extent, there's probably a teeny tiny bit more ICR stuff on the cosmology material that I'm currently studying for Rocks Volume 2 than you get at CMI. But frankly, most of the point people are kind of doing this at Answers in Genesis. They're getting it wrong spectacularly, but at least they're kind of giving it a stab. So it's a toss-up on that into the air quotes scientific aspect. You get at CMI, you got somebody like Michael Ord and Sarfati. These can be very extensive footnote references, which, however, when you start looking at the actual content, isn't necessarily helping. You tend to get, if you compare, say, Acts and Facts with, say, Creation Magazine, they're kind of in a toss-up. Sometimes you can get some Acts and Facts articles with quite a lot of footnotes in them. Jeffrey Tomkins and some of the stuff that he's posted there have that quality to it. Although both Creation Magazine, which is the knockoff, used to be Answers in Genesis, and then it got taken over by CMI when they had their little divorce back in 2006. is going to like a bi-monthly thing, and in the same way that Acts and Facts is. So they're cutting back on the content. I think both of them now are starting to pad the material out with stuff aimed at kids. So there's fewer and fewer novel articles occurring, and an awful lot of that stuff is recycled material from previous stuff. So they're shaking out about the same end of the bag on that. You still get a tad more in the way of air quotes solid content, because a lot of the AIG Answers books are available full text in one variant or another at the website. And that's a big body of claptrap compared to just snippets of Jonathan Sarfati and that who have done books. And some of them or older versions of them are available. So it's an interesting little toss-up question on that little one. The funky part, when we were looking through all of this stuff at the church display, there was only one book, and I think it was, I can't remember whether it was by Sarfati or Bergman, frankly. I think it was Sarfati. It actually had a reference bibliography, not a huge one. I think it was about maybe 40, 50 pages. Not quite as tiny a print as what we get in my stuff. But nonetheless up there, and like 3 pages of it is just Sarfati. Yes, it was Sarfati because he was citing himself. To some extent, that's still continuing in this book. Big chunks of stuff follow along postings at CMI. It's extremely insular. Whether CMI is more consciously insular in this regard is a fun one to deal with. ICR, by definition, because they've got their party lines to deal with. There have been some people who have left ICR because of the natural selection issue, because they think, no, sorry, natural selection is a thing. You just have to get used to it. So you've got that aspect that is isolating them. And an awful lot of them are older crowd. They're old farts like me. Gillis is younger than me, not a huge amount, and he's kind of their point man. So the very fact that although you get speaker things in their professional venues, CMI relegates Gillis to be the poor schlub that shepherds the books around from one church to another and tries to drum up the website. They didn't even mention AIG or ICR. So it's entirely, please come to our website where we are equipping you, as though the Institute for Creation Research and Answers in Genesis hadn't been at this. They just have expunged that bunch from the collective memory, which is maybe not a surprise, but rather sad. The poor Henry Morris, Duane Gish era of creationism is almost invisible, seldom mentioned in a lot of the source material. I was up to speed on the creationist obsessions with magnetic fields, and that turns out now to be just Russell Humphreys, who does some things at ICR and some things in various venues, AIG and that, and some things Creation Research Society Quarterly, all that. He still does papers largely by himself, once in a while collaborating with some other people. But basically, if anybody in the creationism community wants to bring up problems supposedly with the terrestrial geodynamo or issues of geomagnetic reversals or the magnetic field of Uranus and Mercury and the like, they're basically channeling Humphreys explicitly. And Thomas Barnes, who had been part of this, he's dead now, died 20 some odd years ago. He just is kind of read out of the equation. So all they do is just run off of Humphreys. And it's an interesting frame to see the petrification of a lot of this. One thing that really stands out is the lack of models for an awful lot, as they've never really worked out how kinds work. They don't really know what the pre-flood world looked like. Certainly the heat problem never arose, even though our creationist was still waving, Gillis was still waving the Grand Canyon in there and bringing up the obligatory Mt St Helens. Virtually nothing very much on fossils. Of course, he was not going to be bringing up therapsids, and he didn't even really take a side swipe at human evolution in there. So it was very superficial. It was only like about a half-hour talk. And frankly, I was expecting more fireworks. There was a bit more folderol 3 years ago than we're getting this time. So if this is a trajectory, my God, he'll be reduced to a Post-it by 2028. That'll be fun to see, although they'll still be trotting out the same books. So it'll be very interesting to see whether they will continue the process of not having Q&As and that sort of stuff. So that puts us, let me put up my thank you note for our dear people who have stuck by the project through thick and thin as we proceed. And I can tell you that it is very much appreciated. All of our colleagues and researchers, assistant researchers, friends, and legacy patrons who have helped in one form or another and continue to do so over the years. Who knows what is going to be the situation in the years and months to come. At the moment, we had a little bit of a respite on our weather as we dropped down into like the 70s for a bit, had a little snippet of rain. In fact, one of our weather people here at the local channel had gone over to a concert in Seattle, and they got rain rather heavily over there. But we're supposed to be burping back up into the mid-90s by the weekend. So at least we don't have humidity on that front. Part of my brain then is slogging along through all this, the dangling loose ends of the cosmological material with the magnetic fields and the like. It's a really big obsession with creationists. They've devoted a lot of repetitive paperwork over the years to those little tropes and continue to do so at ICR, AIG, and CMI in one form or another. They just won't give it up. They seem to think that there's something mysterious going on. I was just researching stuff on like Mercury, where Humphreys was dribbling out technical papers that were concerned about how Mercury's magnetic field is formed. Well, they've continued to work at it, and it's because Mercury has a really big core for its size, and also the dynamics of the magnetic fields are rather quirky under those circumstances, and so the work continues on. And yet that newer material just kind of gets shuffled by the wayside. And it's like this all through the field. Vernon Cups is a secondary source trope guy here, riffing off of Humphreys. Sarfati riffs off Humphreys. It's an intriguing little small club of echo chamber going on. It's probably one of the smallest niches because basically it's just Humphreys that operates in this area. There will be the little dangling loose ends of lunar formation is one that still I have to collate out. The lunar dust story, the wacky things where Henry Morris back in the day was thinking the craters on the moon were formed when St. Michael battled with Satan in the Old Testament. That one has kind of gotten lost on the shuffle as they've avoided that part. But still, there's still no functional creationist model for these things. It's just basically an anti-naturalistic model for it. And they're always trying to play catch up with science data. It's just hilarious. This I think will be, hopefully, if I play my cards right, it'll be a pretty definitive coverage of how far removed creationist cosmology is from the facts. And we particularly had just a revolution in scientific thinking about it. We're still ongoing because it's complicated. You're modeling star formation and galaxy formation. But now we have increasingly, with the new telescopes like the JWST, we're getting direct data points to plug in. So it turns out that although solar systems tend to form kind of with planets along an ecliptic the way our solar system does. Not all of them do that. So they found that about a third of suns-like stars have solar systems where things are much more skewed. And that makes it ever more complex to figure out the modeling and the dynamics of stuff, to figure out how planetary formation would be occurring within those contexts compared to what we see otherwise. Plus the fact that it's become abundantly clear that how many and when gas giants form out in the cold ice zone backyard has a tremendous effect on what happens inboard as all the little rocky clumps are trying to sort things out. And it's one of the reasons why we have an asteroid belt. It's one of the reasons why some of the planets are cleaned out. And Jupiter probably would have devoured all the inner planets had Saturn not formed to slow it down. And then you have Uranus and Neptune flipping in on the sidebars, which Uranus and Neptune, as gas giants go, are quite small. Kind of the typical one. What you get with Saturn and then Jupiter and bigger are increasingly rare and eccentric things that wreak havoc on the solar systems that form and make modeling much more complex. So needless to say, it took a while to figure that out, which means the creationists that are playing off of ambiguities in this area from papers decades ago, well, duh, we've moved on, kids. So there we go. Let me put our little advert up here for Rocks Were There Volume 1. We're coming up on close to a half an hour. Bing, 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 dong, dong, dong. Come on. As I said, I love working with the stupid little mouse pad rather than a conventional mouse, but what can one do for the moment? Anyhow, we are continuing on in our little sidebar here. I made a tier list of presidents, and Trump and Andrew Jackson and Reagan made our bottom three. Yeah, I'm an old Reagan voter, so I have a slightly different perspective on that. I think Reagan is a very big mixed bag who generated a lot of problems, and that including some staffing people that we're still running amok with, and foreign policy in Central America that was just a mess. I think it's fair to put Andrew Jackson on a failure list, although there are important positives. But some of the big negatives, the obvious expulsion of the Cherokees was a national tragedy. The elimination of the Bank of the United States triggered off masses of depressions. It saddled Van Buren, his successor and vice president, with the first big depression of the 19th century, and they occurred at about every 25 years or so through to the end of the century, two of which Mr. Trump doesn't seem to know happened. He has this absolute fantasy version of the 19th century where he thinks that tariffs produce this unalloyed perfection and wonderment, which it didn't. And there was also a time of unrestricted immigration, which was a positive. They don't seem to be aware of that part. And it also spurred on a lot of progressive reforms, which I think we will be getting hopefully again when we hit our depression. So Mr. Trump will, I think, be generating the 21st century depression, just as the Harding, Coolidge, Hoover bunch generated the 20th century depression. that made it harder to repeat them. Remember, there had been about 30 years or so between the 1890s depression and the 29 stock market crash, whereas both Republicans and Democrats learned their lessons after the Great Depression to the point where nobody made any really catastrophically stupid decisions. And they were able to, one of the positive elements in the Reagan administration was helping to end the disastrous stagflation, where we have extremely high inflation rates circling up to 15%. We went through a recession to get rid of it. Tariffs are the only way we could make money before the 16th Amendment. To some extent, but it was also the case that the federal government was really small. So excise taxes covered a lot. In fact, tariffs, as Trump, I think, has pointed out in some of his semi-lucid moments, we had some budget surpluses in the tariff era, not because necessarily it was raking in a colossal amount of money, but because the federal government didn't do anything. And so it didn't have departments to worry about. There was no Social Security Administration. There was no Federal Reserve System. There was no monitoring of the banking system. There was no Federal Trade Commission to monitor stock trading. There was a whole bunch Federal Drug Administration to deal with adulterated food products and the like. So a lot of the tasks that eventually got mutated into the government, both in the first reform period right after the turn of the 20th century, and then with a bigger level when everything fell down, go boom, in the 1930s, meant that more needed to go on. And so what had been a relatively perfunctory tax so rich, couple percentage point, I think, in the original income tax, expanded somewhat because of the war. World War One came about shortly thereafter. Wars tend to increase the need to do things. The first income tax we had in the United States was during the Civil War, and it had been eliminated afterwards because it was declared unconstitutional and needed to have an amendment then to create a taxation system then with the current system. But the expansion of the government, some of the expansion was done under Nixon. When everyone complained about how nasty and expensive the Great Society was, they were often talking about the Nixon version, where he was outspending the Great Society with a vengeance. We're now facing some of the same problems that George Bush one had with the Reagan tax cuts that were generating deficits that started eating up the budget. It turned out for a while there, one of the biggest ticket items that was flirting with rivaling the defense budget for a thing was just paying interest on the debt. And we are getting back into that situation because of 20 years of absolutely insanely bad tax policy. First with George Bush II, where they lowered the rates down from the Clinton era when we had budget surpluses for a while, and we're actually trying to reduce the national debt in the post-Bush years. It immediately put us back onto a deficit trajectory. Republicans would be screaming, well, because the Congress keeps on spending more money. Well, there's more things you need to do. And a lot of the attempts to buffer the economy, to keep things from collapsing, to keep things safe, to keep people, to growth, all of these matters started becoming harder and harder as we moved into that trickle-down obsession where the Bush tax cuts were kept in place under Obama. No matter what they tried to do, they could never get rid of them, especially after 2010 when the Democrats lost the House. And then along comes Trump 1.0, where they lower the tax on the top even more and increase the deficits, of which Biden during the interregnum tried. That they never changed the tax rates. What's ironic about Trump's supposed lower tax cuts for this year is that the vast majority of it is not a tax cut at all. It's just continuing the stupid tax policies before. There's very few actual tax cuts involved, and an awful lot of that is not necessarily applying to regular working people. So it's a budget buster. We know that the first Trump administration Trump was promising 4, 5, and 6% growth rates that would pay for itself. No, it didn't. It had an economy no stronger than Obama's in terms of growth rate, and saddled with that deficit problem on top of it. And we're finding exactly the situation it's going to have here, ameliorated by the ridiculously high tariffs and the expulsion and rounding up of so many undocumented workers that's going to be having disastrous effects with crop harvesting and the construction industry, plus the income of undocumented people. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars just in the economy. So all of that's going to be sucked out of it. And so these multiple whammies are two-tier presidents were Lincoln and FDR, despite Order 66. Yeah, I think Lincoln certainly qualifies as the most brilliant president. He was so brilliant, he tended to not make people realize how brilliant he was. He was the opposite of a Tom Dewey type in that, who was a very bright guy, never became president. But you knew you were talking to a bright guy. To some extent, Clinton falls in that box as well. Same thing. But Lincoln was just a master of all of that. One of the few presidents, I think the only president, has a patent. He was a science geek and extraordinary in every possible respect. FDR is the great experimenter. He was running on a balanced budget platform. He tried to balance the budget in 36, and that started bumping us into a recession during that period. So he had to pull back. So a lot of the New Deal experimentation was that of, we got to try something. We got to do something because people are in a state of misery. And the old Republican method of kind of trickling down from the top down approach was ineffectual. But part of the heart, FDR would still have liked to have done things, but he was also pragmatic. Let's see what we can do to get things done. And reforms needed to be done. And an awful lot of reforms that we should have been doing over the last 20 years, genuinely trying to get a grip on how to handle immigration, breaking up large banks after the 2008 meltdown, dealing with issues about how to deal with affordable housing and a very unequal inequality level, which were at 1929 levels. And have been that way for quite some time. It's a lot of stress points going on. And I can't see a likelihood of any serious reform in that department happening until things fall down, go boom. And when things fall down, go boom, boy, that acts as a stimulus for people to change their ways of thinking and do new stuff. And then you'll also be seeing at the grassroots level, who knows who will be percolating up. You have some people who are very articulate and interesting already, Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and others. But I think there'll be some fresh voices popping up from the bottom up that we aren't seeing now because the conditions aren't operating for them. But we'll see how that goes. So it's going to be a very interesting time. It would be really important, and I bang my drum on this, and will do so to my dying day. Source methods matters. We have a system where too many people in office are Tortugan minds who are terrible at fact-checking what they believe. Their convictions are not the problem, although we have a convicted felon too, so there's another conviction. But the reason why these people get elected, partly that kind of lethargy and gerrymandering and huge blocks of voters thinking voting doesn't matter, and so they just accelerate the process. But also big chunks of people don't know how to fact check what they believe and make judgments based on it. 77 million Trump voters screwed up. And I would contend that either they didn't know much about Trump's background or just didn't think it mattered. Hope that fall down goes boom, teaches people, but I'm doubtful of that these days. Well, it's going to be a grand experiment, and we're going to see what we have. We got a very different dynamic. We have smartphones, we have an internet communication system and the like, provided that stays up. We have, we're really going to be stress testing the fact that we have a federal system. So that means that even if the God King Emperor in Washington, D.C. wants to do stuff, there's limits to the things they can do because states exist and they have their own independent governments and they have their own police forces and they have their own constitutions and they have their own courts. And these things cannot be completely overruled, however much they try, although some of them will try. that aggrandizement, that imperial presidency on steroids that Project 2025 wants, and Donald Trump in his dementia state and his enablers would love, and for that matter, J.D. Vance would love. So, you get rid of Trump and the 25th Amendment, you get President Vance, and he's knee deep with Vought and Thiel and all the rest who have their own little agenda. So we've got an awful lot of stuff going on here. You're quite a ways across the Rubicon over there in the U.S. Yes, I'm afraid we're battling around in the water on it. Some of the things that give me a qualified optimism is that we're in a very different world in relation to the rest of places than we were when the 1929 crash occurred. I've mentioned this previously, that the European Union is a very different environment than the disconnected rival states that fell apart all across Europe with terrible economic policies. And although it could be argued that the European Union's economic aspects were less robust than Biden's economy, they only need to be less inefficient in response than a Trump economy to bump the 450 million Europeans into a very significant position as a bastion of comparative prosperity, even if our bunch falls apart. And nothing would not stop countries from forming independent trade organizations. You've theoretically got the whole European British Commonwealth that can connect up again with them, even if they aren't officially part of the European Union. So it's going to be very, very interesting. MAG is all about states' rights unless the states do stuff they disagree with, like gay marriage, pro-choice. Oh, yes, exactly. It's a pathological hypocrisy. Mehdi Hassan just had a note on his Blue Sky feed reminding that some years back he was highlighting how Sean Hannity and bunch were screaming bloody murder at the prospect of Biden federalizing Washington, D.C. and calling in federal troops and all of that. La-di-da, that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing over a completely fictitious crime wave that he insists and might, in his dementia brain, actually believe. But they've got a narrow window of trying to make totalitarian progress before the economy starts falling apart. And a lot of MAGA will not be able to pretend that prices are going down when they're going up, and that unemployment is not improving, especially if they're ones out of work, and lots of people they know are out of work. I've already spotted this, and my friends in Seattle and the like are kind of got their eyeballs peeled on it as well. Take note of how many crowds are operating in stores, how many stores have their hours being reduced. They're closing earlier, closing some of their stores in particular things, hunkering back. There's all sorts of warning signs of things on the brink. And all the necessary triggering efforts are in place for a really serious economic downturn. Now, how China is going to react to all of that stuff, things are not a rosy perfection over there as well. They have very high youth unemployment rate. There's, to some extent, are they potentially facing a breakup like the Russians did? Hard to say. Who would able to predict in 1929 where the world was going to be in 1929, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, and on. And if we can avoid steering into like global warfare and all of the rest, a global depression, if we don't get a global depression, you can have localized depression and some serious recessions. But if it doesn't spill into a depression globally, that lowers the prospects of things getting out of hand in the military department, because that was one of the things that greased World War II. Japanese expansionism was another area over in Asia. And of course, you had Hitler taking power in Germany. And you had the nation Soviet Union being So you had this bit where you had to choose between fascism and communism, and like, excuse me, we need a different choice. Are we in that kind of situation today of where we've got bifurcating disasters and polarities? Not yet. So we live in exciting times, but not necessarily catastrophic times. And this will be able to see what circumstances are in terms of human ingenuity and interconnectivity. One thing it may do, of course, is undermine the kind of imperial presidency and that dictatorial urge where people are doing things from the bottom up and just going at people from the top down and saying, goodbye, we can work around you. In the same way that I don't think United States influence will ever be as great in the decades to come compared to what it was before, precisely because Donald Trump is forcing the rest of the world to do without us. And they'll figure it out, and they'll do without us. And thank you so much, for reducing American influence in the world. We'll still be a cultural influence and all that. That's entirely possible. I mean, the whole world looks like a bunch of Americans in terms of the clothing styles we do and the music people listen to and the like. And that will very possibly continue. But the kind of strutting dominance that Donald Trump wants us to kind of go back to, he's going to blow it in the same way he blew his own businesses out of the water. So that fills a little bit of gloom into the mix. As I said, it's going to be very interesting times. I wouldn't be at all happy to see what draconian choices the Federal Reserve would have to do if we have a serious fall down and inflationary surge, because you're supposed to raise interest rates to slow down inflation, but lower them to improve the economy in a slump. Well, you can't do both of those at the same time. And there's also a limit. You can't lower things below zero, although idiot Trump seems to think you can reduce drug prices 1,500%. Wow. Why aren't more people going, what on that one? But I guess we're going to have to hit them over the head with a 2x4 with a depression in order to get their attention, and then say, maybe you should have been paying attention when you had the numbskull in chief acting like a crazy person, because he was a crazy person. Don't blame me. I voted for Harris. So anyway, going to be a fun couple of years ahead and maybe a couple of decades. We'll find out. I would like to see the civilization not collapse. I'd like to see us continuing to explore and do science and improve people's lives. And we have all the wherewithal and the brain power to do it, but not when you have incompetent, crazy people slowing the brakes on what should be a time of progress and development. So pay us to take drugs now. Yes. Who knows what wackaloonery Trump may pull off as his brain deteriorates, and especially when things start getting difficult, when inflation is picking up and the economy is slowing down. What weird attitude will he do that is completely antithetical to standard Republican dogma, free market economics, no government interference? My God, he's practically ordering companies to obey a government mandated industrial policy on chips in a way that normally Republicans would be screaming bloody murder about. But because it's Donald Trump, they have to just roll over and play dead all during this. It's pathetic. If the climate doesn't reduce us to enclaves, yes. Well, that's another matter that I live in Washington State, where perhaps we have more resilience in climate models. A third of Florida will, if especially if the Greenland ice cap melts, say bye-bye to Miami, and we don't have to worry about Nat Park having a competition with Disney World if it's underwater. So anyway, yes, I designed an amusement park, remember. If you want to find out about Nat Park, you can look at the Memories of Natatorium Park. Remember When, I think it's called. It's on YouTube. I'm at minute 53. I've been kind of knee-deep researching some, because it turns out there's a whole slew of tours of amusement parks. So I'm able to get caught up to speed on what the conditions are at some of the parks that have closed down, or things that are in trouble and wackiness, where they've spent $115 million at Disney World on a spectacular fountain electric light show, fireworks that half of the people there at the park couldn't see because it was designed for a limited audience, and they had to tear it all out. So, I mean, this is just ridiculous wasting of money stuff, and to see what the new kinds of rides and things are on. So anyway, that keeps us all busy. Trump does die of old age. How will Vance play out, since he's he's a true believer. He has an ideology, and it's whereas Trump is just Trump. Trump is a personality cult, and as his mind veers all over the place, whatever he wants to do is great because he has his whim. But Vance is a conservative, neo-Catholic, culture camp ideologue. Peter Thiel and these others, they have a very top-down, oligarchy, elitist command view of the world. And it's not very democratic, and it's not very progressive, and it's not very workable, except if you want to live in Mad Max light, or maybe even Mad Max level world. And so I'm not at all thrilled. You have to give it to little Vance. He's certainly been on a meteoric trajectory, going from anti-Trump novelist or a book writer to a senator and Trump acolyte and vice president, and presiding over the Senate. He's the reason why Hegseth is the Secretary of Defense, because they had a tie vote and he broke the tie. And so all of these things, he's apparently not so pro-Ukraine as some people in the old Republican Party, although clearly Zelensky and the Europeans did a good job, at least, of buffer zoning his brain, so that when he had his little meeting with Putin in Alaska, nothing really came of it. Although now our good old Taco Trump doesn't seem to be anxious to put in serious repercussions, even though he said he would. So this flip-floppery that happens with Trump, you can't ever count on him on anything. He's like a weather vane where the wind is constantly blowing around. You can't tell what he's going to do from one day to another, because he doesn't know what he's doing is one day and another. And his brain is deteriorating in genuine dementia. So his brain is cycling back to a fantasy world where he thinks about what his dad was and imagining conversations in events that never took place. And it's only going to get worse. So it wouldn't surprise me that there might be a move by Vance. It would be in his favor to do so, to invoke the 25th Amendment and bump Trump out of office, and he would become president. So I'm not sanguine about that, but it could happen. So it's going to be very interesting times ahead. Remember, though, less of a window when they're trying to make these arguments when the economy is falling apart, because nothing fails quite like failure, and it's going to be very, very complex for them to try to do this. Yes, it would try to give Alaska back to Putin. Yes, yeah. Well, for a while, Trump was thinking he was going to go to Leningrad, which isn't Leningrad anymore. It's St. Petersburg. That's all part of the fact that his brain is cycling back into the 1970s. He'd forgot that he was going to be meeting him in Alaska. But yeah, the Russians used to own Alaska. Maybe we could do a trade, and maybe we could throw in Florida as a package deal, would Spain like that back? I think the Mar-a-Lago might not want to go along with that. But anyway, so everybody stay safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins, and stay cool if it's hot. And we will see all of you kids next week. Bingo bongo. I think I put my advert up. Yes, there we go. Okie doke.